Now, for more on that working group and the latest on North Korea, we have with us Dr. Myong-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So the inaugural meeting of the working group on North Korea took place on Tuesday. It seems to have gone quite well without too much of a hitch. What do you make of this first meeting so far?
Definitely it's a positive development. I mean, we have to remember that the origin of this working group was what happened back in October, probably the worst moment in the recent history between the two allies, when President Trump made this remark back in October when he was asked about the potential relaxation of sanctions by South Korea. President Trump mentioned that South Korea wouldn't do anything without the U.S. approval. That was a minor scandal in Korea and Washington, that how a U.S. president could talk like that about to an ally like South Korea. So clearly, having a working group is going to avoid a repeat of a situation like that, and it's going to smooth out, the perception of the development of the relations between South Korea and the United States.
So it was not mentioned in that previous report. After the meeting finished, in a press briefing, the South Korean nuclear envoy, Do-hoon, revealed that the U.S. has given its strong support to the Inter-Korean Railway project. Now, of course, that project is the one reached in previous Inter-Korean summits, designed to eventually connect the roads and railways of the two Koreas. Now, this is a surprise considering Washington has quite openly expressed its reservations over it in recent weeks. And as you said, Trump had mentioned, about giving permission to South Korea for whatever its actions are. So it seems like Washington has given its permission, could we say? Does this surprise you at all? And what has changed? Why now?
Well, clearly, the purpose of the working group is to have a well-coordinated response to a Chinese like this, of how to approach North Korea, engage North Korea economically and politically. And it's like for South Koreans' part, essentially resolve some of the misperception that U.S. might have had about what South Korea intended to do by reconnecting the railroad and the road with North Korea. I think South Korea used this opportunity to dispel the misperception and clarify the fact that South Korea didn't intend to, for example, supply North Korea with materials beyond what's strictly necessary to establish some sort of ceremonial, symbolic event of reconnecting the transportation link between the two Koreas. So essentially, South Korea probably clarified to the United States that we won't be violating any UN or US sanctions.
However, this doesn't dispel this concerns that you mentioned, we talked about earlier, where Trump gives the US gives their permission for Korea to do what they want with North Korea. I mean, so does this perhaps continue these kind of criticisms going?
Well, I think it's a little bit different from giving permission over and the policy coordination between the two allies. I think both South Korea and the United States have agreed from the get-go that when it comes to North Korea, the coordination is of utmost importance. So when I think President Trump misused the term permission in this case, I think he should have used the policy coordination. So I think, being President Trump being who he is, I think people really didn't take that too seriously. But I think, there's nothing less important than emphasizing the role of close coordination between the United States and South Korea. And working group is clearly is here to serve that purpose.
Korean officials also said that they hope the groundbreaking ceremony for the railway project will take place before the end of the year. That's obviously later than originally scheduled, which was for late this month and early December. Do you think it will happen now?
I think so. I think definitely the announcement yesterday in Washington about the results of the working group has been a very positive development in that regard, and essentially removed a major obstacle towards carrying out this reconnection ceremony between the two Koreas.
So let's look ahead now for this kind of working group. So this meeting went very smoothly, but it might not always go this smoothly. So, I mean, what will happen with this working group if there are more difficult matters that they need to handle? And how often and how easily can they convene this kind of group?
Well, I think the working group is actually flexible enough to manage this kind of difference in opinions between the two sides. And that's the exact purpose of the working group. And I think I mean, if there's any discrepancy or like a difference of opinion between the two allies, that conflict is going to be contained within the working group and be resolved here. And the composition and the frequency of the meetings within the working group indicates that I think they will minimize this kind of differences of opinions. We know, for instance, that the working group is going to encompass not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the part of South Korea and State Department, the part of the United States, but also it's going to have the Ministry of Unification, as well as members of the National Security Council of the Blue House, and likewise on the American side. So essentially, the working group is going to incorporate many different actors who are relevant when it comes to determining policy matters when it comes to North Korea. So it actually minimizes the conflict or differences of opinion, sorry. And also the frequency of the meetings. Apparently, a working group is going to regularize the meetings, and then they try to have at least 2 meetings per month. I think the frequent meetings is going to allow frequent communication between the two sides. So even if there's a difference of opinion, probably the working group will be able to contain it and then minimize it.
So despite this meeting going quite well, Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, in a separate policy briefing with the press, he seemed to warn Seoul that, Seoul, they need to make sure peace and the denuclearization of North Korea, he says, do not lag behind improvements in the relationship between the two Koreas. So that sounds like a warning to Seoul not to get too far ahead, though.
Well, clearly, there's been some recent statements from South Korea and the South Korean government that sounded like I was asking the international community for supporting the South Korean idea of relaxing sanctions on North Korea as an incentive for North Korea to take tentative steps towards denuclearization. So I think Secretary Pompeo's message is essentially a response to that sanctions regime as well as the denuclearization, essentially these are the conjoined twins. They have to take place in the same speed and same way and same scale. So I think the reiteration is clearly also a way to influence the South Korean policymaking process that we should match our speed of inter-Korean engagement with denuclearization process.
Okay, so the South Korea-U.S. relationship seems to be good after this meeting. But actually, the bigger fish that they need to sort out is the North Korea-U.S. talks, which have been stalled for some time now. But there are now reports saying that there will be finally high-level talks between Pompeo and Kim Myong-chol from North Korea next week, possibly. Now, we've been down this road before, so maybe we shouldn't get our hopes too high right now, because it can be delayed or postponed again at some point. But they do need to have this meeting at some point, right? Otherwise, they've planned this summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un next year, so they need to meet now before it goes on to next year.
Clearly, that's absolutely right. I think President Trump has signaled the willingness to meet with Kim Jong-un as soon as possible, possibly earlier next year. But then we have to remember that the realization of the second U.S.-DPRK summit is contingent upon the progress being made on the denuclearization front. And in this particular case, it will be North Korea to essentially take genuine steps towards denuclearization, such as shutting down the nuclear infrastructure such as Dongchangri and Punggye-ri test sites completely, as well as providing an inventory of North Korea's nuclear assets to the United States. Reading the North Korean media in the recent days, there's no clear signal that the North Korea is taking that kind of approach right now. So I think there could be tentative meetings on both sides regarding finding out the possible date for the second summit, but then without a big explicit change in the North Korea's public position regarding denuclearization, I would be still skeptical about a high-level meeting taking place soon.
Let's move on to some other developments on North Korea before we go. So on Tuesday, North Korea destroyed 10 guard posts along the demilitarized zone on the border between the two Koreas. And that was, of course, agreed upon in the military agreement that the two Koreas signed back in September. How much does this show that the North Koreans are sincere in trying to show that they want this path towards improving relations with the two Koreas?
I think it clearly shows their sincerity towards implementing the agreements they have reached with South Korea, but at the same time it betrays North Korea's confidence about their willingness to go along with the confidence building measures and the dismantlement of the conventional military infrastructure along the DMZ. I think North Koreans are thinking that because they have acquired nuclear deterrence, they can now engage in reducing their conventional weapons. So I think it's actually a sign of confidence as well.
So these guard posts, I mean, the pictures we're seeing, they're quite dramatic with explosions, but at the end of the day, they're not that huge a deal for the North Korean military, is that right?
Or for the South Korean military either. I mean, in many ways, the guard posts were there in violation of in spirit, a violation of the armistice agreement. And then there are actually hundreds of them. So just getting rid of like 10% of the overall total, I think it doesn't really have a material impact on the defense posture, offensive posture on both sides.
Tomorrow as well, on Thursday, there's further developments on the border as well. The two Koreas are set to connect a military road across the DMZ as well. Now, this road is set to be used in order to help efforts to recover war remains. But the symbolism of connecting these kind of roads is quite striking. What should we make of this?
Well, we have gone down this road before. I mean, one of the most shocking inter-Korean development in the recent years happened to be the establishment of not recent, but happened to be the establishment of the Kaesong Industrial Complex on the North Korean side. So, I mean, compared to that kind of event, reconnecting a minor transportation link with North Korea for a very specific, narrow purpose of finding remains of the war dead, I think it's actually it's significant, but it's not really materially important in the ongoing discussions, I would say.
And you don't think there are any concerns about violating international sanctions? Because when you talk about reconnecting roads, that's the first concern, I think, that can be raised.
If the road is reconnected and the road is used to transfer or import or export goods and materials that are explicitly listed in the UN sanctions as forbidden, then that would be actually problematic. But I think both Koreas have clarified that the purpose of a road connection is going to serve a humanitarian purpose.
Well, we'll have to see how these developments continue as well to grow, and hopefully we'll get your opinions on them later in the future as well. Thank you for coming on the show today, and we look forward to having you back next time.
Great.